Today's story: my husband abandoned my father's funeral to go on vacation with his mistress. At 3 a.m., I received a text from my father. "I'm not dead. Come to the cemetery quietly." Today, I will tell you the story of my life, a story that still sends shivers down my spine whenever I think about it. Before I got married, I thought I was the luckiest woman in the world. Carter and I had been dating for 3 years, enough time for me to believe this love was destiny. Carter was gentle, attentive, and always seemed deeply concerned about my well-being. His mother, Evelyn, praised me the first time we met. "This girl is bright, articulate, and so polite. I absolutely adore her." Hearing that made my heart bloom. I thought I was truly blessed. I remember telling my father, Arthur Sterling, "Dad, marrying Carter means my life will be peaceful and secure." My dad just gave a gentle smile. "If you feel he's the right fit, I'm happy for you. Just remember, as a married woman, you must live for yourself a little too. Don't let anyone take advantage of you." I laughed it off at the time, thinking my dad was just being overly protective. After all, Carter was always perfectly put together and articulate around me. After the wedding, I moved into my husband's family home. Evelyn lived in a massive, historic estate in a wealthy suburb of Seattle. Looking at it from the outside, it was pure luxury, but for some reason, the moment I stepped inside, a cold chill ran down my spine. I reassured myself that I just wasn't used to my new life yet. But fire tests gold, and adversity tests character. It only took a few weeks for me to realize that the coldness was not my imagination. Evelyn changed her tune incredibly fast. The first day, she called me sweetheart. The next day, it was daughter-in-law. A few days later, it became, "Lauren, can't you wash these dishes any cleaner?" "Lauren, what is taking you so long?" Her words weren't overtly abusive, but her tone was like stepping on needles. Perhaps anyone who has lived with a domineering mother-in-law will understand. There are words that aren't loud, but they hurt more than physical blows. Carter, my husband, became a completely different person. He no longer texted to ask if I had eaten lunch, nor did he look at me with affectionate eyes. After work, he would lock himself in his home office. When I knocked to call him for dinner, he would just grunt dismissively. Many nights, he ate out and came home late, lying that he was busy with client meetings. I knew he was lying, but I didn't react. Women in love often have soft hearts. I kept thinking that he was just tired from work, and yielding a little wouldn't kill me. I remember one drizzly evening, I hurried to the patio to bring in the cushions so Evelyn wouldn't get upset. She looked at me and said, "I'm not forcing you to do all the chores, but this house has its standards. You need to know your place. Nobody likes a freeloader." I bit my lip and forced a smile. "Yes, Evelyn, I understand." My throat felt tight. I worked a full-time corporate job all day, and when I got off, I rushed home to cook and clean. I was no freeloader. But I didn't want my parents to hear any gossip, so I swallowed the bitter pill. My father always warned me, being too gentle isn't always a good thing. Yet, at the time, I still naively believed that if I just endured, my husband's family would eventually love me. People say that when a husband and wife are united, they can empty the ocean, but it seemed like no matter how much I bailed, the ocean only grew deeper. Carter's distance became glaringly obvious. His phone was always placed face down on the table. If I walked into the room, he immediately locked the screen. When I gently asked, "Are you hiding something from me?" he would snap, "Stop being paranoid." From then on, everyone in that massive estate seemed to live in their own isolated world. I comforted myself, thinking it was just the rocky adjustment period of early marriage, but things only got worse. One day, while bringing a fruit plate up to Evelyn's room, I overheard her on the phone. "She's too soft-spoken. It makes her useless. Anyway, we'll see how long we can tolerate her in this house." I stood outside the door, my heart skipping a beat. I wasn't sad because she was bad-mouthing me. I was sad because my expectations had been completely crushed. Yet, despite the unhappiness, I thought these were just minor hurdles. I was young, I had hope, and I still believed in the concept of family. I had no idea that all of this was merely the prelude to a terrifying tragedy. In those days, I didn't know I was standing at the edge of a pitch-black abyss, one that would drag my entire life down and destroy my faith in marriage and humanity. Had I known, I would have never taken another step. But life is unpredictable. You can measure the depth of a river, but you can never measure the depths of the human heart. And then, everything collapsed on a day I never saw coming. That morning, the Seattle sky was gloomy, a dark omen of what was to come. I remember clearly. I was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when my phone started vibrating relentlessly. The caller ID showed Marcus, my father's loyal chauffeur of many years. Marcus was usually a very calm man, but today, his voice was trembling. Lauren, listen to me and stay calm. Your dad has been in an accident. I froze. My vision went dark, and the spatula in my hand clattered to the floor without me even realizing it. I bombarded him with questions, but my head felt stuffed with cotton. I couldn't hear anything clearly except the word accident. Carter stepped out of his room, looking annoyed by the noise. I choked out through my sobs. Carter, my dad. My dad was in a terrible accident. Carter didn't ask a single comforting question. He just replied as blandly as tap water. Yeah, I'll look into it later. Evelyn looked at me as if I were interrupting her morning routine. Crying makes a woman look ugly, Lauren. Calm down. Your father is an old man. He probably just wasn't careful on the road. That comment sliced straight through my heart. But at that moment, I was in too much shock to react. I immediately hailed an Uber to my father's mansion. When I arrived, the place was swarming with people, everyone wearing somber faces. Marcus ran out to support me, his arm in a sling. The police reported that your dad's SUV went off a cliff in the Cascade Mountains, Marcus wept. I was knocked unconscious. They couldn't find your father's body intact. I collapsed. In that moment, my heart felt like it was being crushed in a vice. They say losing a father is like losing the roof over your head. It was true. I felt my entire world tilt and crash. That same afternoon, Reverend Thomas, a trusted family pastor, arrived. Wearing his clerical collar, he murmured prayers. He claimed that he had received the news early, rushed to the authorities, and had the recovered remains cremated immediately to spare the family the trauma, bringing the ashes back so my father's soul could find peace. I stared at the pristine white porcelain urn on the altar, my hands shaking violently. I never thought I would see my father reduced to ashes in such a rapid, absurd manner. Employees from Sterling Enterprises, my father's business partners, and countless acquaintances flooded in. The memorial service was grand, fitting for a renowned CEO. The scent of floral arrangements filled the air, and the line of people waiting to pay their respects stretched out the door. But amidst the sea of wreaths and sympathetic eyes, I felt infinitesimally small, lost, and freezing cold, as if that urn had sucked all the warmth out of my body. I desperately wanted Carter to be by my side, just to hold my hand. But from morning until night, he never showed up. He didn't answer my calls or texts. I tried to convince myself he was busy with emergency board meetings, desperately finding excuses to soothe my own pain. That was until I overheard some executives from the conglomerate whispering behind my back. Why is Carter in Cabo right now? His father-in-law's funeral is today. Haven't you seen? He's there with a girl. They look very cozy. I turned around. On their phone screen was a photo of Carter, smiling brightly, his arm wrapped tightly around the waist of a young, beautiful woman at a beachfront resort. Right as my father's memorial was peaking, a gunshot went off in my head. I gripped the back of a chair, nearly collapsing. I couldn't believe it. I had loved him so much, placed all my trust in this marriage. I walked into the back room, trying to hide the humiliation welling up in my throat. Evelyn saw my pale face, gave me a side eye, and said, "Carter is a grown man with his own life. Don't make a scene while we're hosting a wake." Her words rubbed salt into my open wounds. I smiled, my lips trembling uncontrollably. I just wanted to know where he is. Evelyn crossed her legs and poured herself a cup of tea, utterly unbothered. He went on vacation to relax. His work is stressful. You can handle the funeral arrangements yourself. As night fell, the guests dispersed. I sat alone by the altar, looking up at my father's portrait. my tears flowing endlessly. Reverend Thomas paced around the room, reciting prayers, but his eyes kept darting toward the donation envelopes people had left, calculating their worth. Around 3 a.m., exhausted, I curled up on the sofa, clutching a thin blanket, shivering. My tears hadn't even dried when my phone vibrated. It was a text from an unknown number. The message contained only a few words. Lauren. It's Dad. I'm not dead. Come to the private family cemetery behind the estate quietly. Don't tell anyone. A chill ran down my spine, and my eyes widened so much I nearly dropped the phone. I read the words over and over, my body shaking violently. It was my father's writing style, the way he used punctuation, his specific phrasing. It was unmistakable. My throat tightened, my heart pounding as if it would burst. Dad is still alive. I shot up like I had been electrocuted. That short message danced in my head, every word slicing into my heart like a scalpel. I'm not dead. How could that be? But my intuition screamed that it was truly him. Someone could fake a name, but they couldn't perfectly mimic the specific way my father typed. I clutched my phone, trembling so hard I had to grip the armrest to stay standing. The massive house was dead silent. All I could hear was the wind whistling through the old windows and the rhythmic sound of Reverend Thomas's footsteps in the adjacent hall. The heavy scent of lilies made me nauseous, and my mind was complete chaos. I had to stay calm. If my dad was really alive, it meant someone desperately wanted the world to believe he was dead. It meant the accident wasn't an accident. I swallowed hard and stealthily stood up. The moment my heel touched the floor, Evelyn cracked her bedroom door open. Her eyes were sharp as daggers. Lauren, why are you still awake? I jolted and replied, I have a severe headache. I was just going to step outside for some fresh air. She scanned me from head to toe and sneered. Do not wander around the house in the middle of the night. We are in mourning. Don't bring any bad luck into this home. I bowed my head, but inside, I was burning. I walked back to the sofa and pretended to lie down until she closed her door. I waited until the sound of her slippers faded away before I dared to open my phone again. The text message was still there, glowing brightly on the black screen. I breathed heavily and decided to text the only person I could trust right now, Theo, my father's most loyal executive assistant. I texted him to meet me at the back patio immediately, without making a sound. 5 minutes later, Theo appeared, his face exhausted from staying up all night managing the funeral logistics. He looked at me with deep concern. Lauren, you called me out here so urgently. What's wrong? You scared me. I held my phone up to his face. Theo read the message, his eyes going wide. Impossible. This number isn't in his contacts, but the phrasing is exactly how Mr. Sterling writes. I whispered, my voice trembling. Theo, did you notice the security cameras near the family cemetery glitching earlier tonight? You mentioned you suspected someone tampered with them. Theo nodded rapidly. Yes. When we took the floral arrangements out back, I noticed the camera feed blinked out, as if someone covered the lens or stood right in front of it. I looked deep into Theo's eyes. If my dad is alive, it means someone tried to kill him, and they want the world to think he's dead. Theo swallowed hard. Lauren, what are we going to do? I answered with just a breath. We go. The two of us quietly unlocked the back door. That night, the moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the air was freezing. The private family cemetery was located just past the wooded area behind the estate, a few hundred yards away. Walking through the morbid atmosphere, the chirping of crickets, and the faint sound of prayers echoing from the house made everything feel even more terrifying. As we neared the cemetery, Theo suddenly grabbed my arm. Lauren, I checked the camera logs again on my phone. There is a 1-minute blackout on the feed, and it matches the exact timestamp of the text message you received. I shivered, my heart racing. I looked around, but there was only the wind rustling the pine trees. The cemetery was pitch black, illuminated only by a dim yellow light near a stone angel statue. Then, I saw it. The freshly dug grave bearing my father's name, Arthur Sterling. My entire body trembled, my chest tightening as if squeezed by an invisible hand. I stepped closer, placing my hand on the damp earth. If my father was alive, whose ashes were in that urn? And who had stepped up to confirm they were his? Before I could think further, a rustling sound came from the thick bushes behind me. I spun around, and Theo immediately flicked on his flashlight. The beam of light hit a stumbling figure stepping out of the shadows. His clothes were shredded, his face bruised and bleeding. But his eyes, those were the exact same eyes I had known for my entire life. The word Dad caught in my throat. I rushed forward as if my whole world was collapsing. I hugged him tightly, hot tears streaming down onto his hands. My father was panting heavily, his voice a raspy croak. "Lauren, it's me. I'm not dead. They want to kill me. You have to listen to me." I screamed in silence, terrified someone would hear. "Dad, what happened? Who did this to you? Tell me." He gripped my arm, squeezing out every word with his last ounce of strength. "Carter and his mother are not who you think they are." My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest. In that moment, I still didn't fully comprehend his words, but my intuition screamed the truth. My husband's family wasn't just cruel to me, they were ruthless toward my father. And what I thought was a tragedy was merely the prologue. I stood frozen in the freezing cemetery, my arm wrapped around my father's shoulders, terrified that if I let go, he would vanish. Theo quickly took off his heavy jacket and draped it over my dad. Arthur leaned against a tree trunk, his breathing erratic. His body was covered in scratches and deep purple bruises, with patches of dried blood. Seeing him so battered broke my heart into a million pieces. "Dad, who did this to you? Tell me," I choked out. He closed his eyes, forcing down the cold air, cutting at his lungs, and spoke. His voice was faint, but every word dropped like a stone into my soul. "It wasn't an accident, Lauren. They did this. They tried to murder me." The night wind whipped through the trees, the rustling leaves sounding like weeping. Theo crouched down, deeply alarmed. "Mr. Sterling, who? Tell us so we can figure out a way to get you to safety." My father opened his eyes, looking at us for a long time before dropping the heaviest truth I had ever heard. "Carter, his mother Evelyn, Richard Vance, and Reverend Thomas. They all conspired to kill me." I felt my head explode. I shook my head violently. "No, it can't be. Carter and Evelyn wouldn't do that to you." My father raised his hand and placed it on my head. His voice deepened, laced with profound disappointment and agony. "Lauren, you are too trusting. Evelyn and Carter care for no one but their own greed. I discovered they were funneling corporate contracts to shell companies, embezzling millions from Sterling Enterprises. Before I could deal with them, they decided to strike first." He paused, breathing heavily, his voice raspy. "Richard Vance engineered the plot. He said all they needed was a staged accident and a random John Doe's body slipped into the crematorium. Reverend Thomas agreed to handle the fake ashes and forge the paperwork. Now, everyone believes I'm dead. I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood, though I barely felt the pain. Every word my father spoke struck like a sledgehammer against my naive perception of my marriage. "But how did you survive?" I asked, my voice trembling so much it was barely a whisper. My dad leaned against the tree, slowly recalling the nightmare. "Right before the SUV approached the cliffside curve, I felt something was wrong. I yelled at Marcus to slow down, but he had been drugged beforehand. He passed out at the wheel. The car lost control and skidded toward the edge. Just as the vehicle plummeted, I threw myself out the door. I clutched my chest, imagining the horrific scene, my limbs going weak. I lay unconscious in the brush down the embankment. A local hunter checking his traps early in the morning found me still breathing. He dragged me to his cabin, gave me water, and patched me up, but I didn't dare reveal my identity. I knew they would come back to check the crash site. Theo gritted his teeth. "Sir, they are far more evil than we ever imagined. Where have you been hiding these past few days?" My dad looked around, speaking softly, fearing listening ears. "In the dense woods behind the estate, I hid during the day and crept out at night to gather information. Today, I saw the funeral preparations. I saw my portrait on the altar. I knew they were on the verge of succeeding. I burst into tears. Dad, why didn't you contact me sooner?" I was dying inside. He squeezed my hand, his voice choking up. I didn't dare. You were living right inside their house. I was terrified they would hurt you first. I clearly felt the immense heartbreak in his grip, the agony of a father betrayed to the absolute core. A man who had lived an honest life, built a reputable empire, and extended a helping hand to countless people, only to be stabbed in the back by the very ones he treated as family. Theo nodded decisively. Sir, you can't stay out here. Let me take you to the old abandoned warehouse behind the company's industrial lot. It's deserted and safe. Don't worry, I will personally stand guard. My father looked at me, awaiting my answer. I wiped away my tears. Let me take care of this, Dad. No matter what happens, I will protect you. In that second, I knew I was no longer the submissive, gentle daughter-in-law. I had to face reality. My husband's family wasn't just emotionally abusive. They were murderers actively trying to execute my father and steal everything my family had built. We supported my dad, walking step by step through the light fog. Every footstep was a silent vow I made to myself. I would never let anyone in that family trample on me for another second of my life. We got him to the secure hideout. After Theo cleaned and dressed my father's wounds, I stood watching the two men, my heart churning like a violent storm. I knew my life had just taken a sharp turn onto a path of no return. Ahead of me was a war I never thought I'd have to fight, a war against the very people who once called me family. After settling my dad into the dilapidated warehouse behind the industrial supply lot, a place forgotten by time, with peeling paint and a flickering yellow light bulb, I finally realized my heart was still trying to beat its way out of my chest. Theo, my dad, and I sat in silence for a few minutes to steady our nerves. The harsh smell of the antiseptic Theo used mingled with the freezing draft seeping through the cracks in the door. My dad held my hand, his voice raspy. Lauren, from now on, you must be incredibly careful. You need to go back to that house and act completely normal. Do not let anyone suspect you know anything. I nodded, but a terrifying new fear rose within me. I was terrified of every breath, every glance inside that estate. I was terrified of everything I had ever naively trusted. Theo added, Tomorrow, I'll bring more medical supplies, food, and warm blankets for you, Mr. Sterling. You need to rest for the first few days. Don't worry, I'll be here. My dad sighed and patted Theo's shoulder. I won't forget this, Theo. And you too, Lauren. I'm only alive because of you two. I gently placed my hand over my father's, my heart heavy. I had never wanted the sun to rise so quickly. I had to get back to the estate before anyone realized I was missing. At the crack of dawn, thick fog blanketed the dirt road, leading away from the warehouse. I pulled my coat tight and pulled my hood low over my face. Walking out the back gate, my heart pounded like a war drum. If Evelyn or anyone in the house found out I left in the middle of the night, everything would be destroyed. Walking a short distance, I stopped to catch my breath. The sky was turning a pale silver, and the distant sound of morning traffic began to hum. The biting cold against my face snapped my logic back into place. I had to play my part perfectly. I could not let anyone know I had just returned from the cemetery. Not a single soul. When I quietly pushed open the heavy oak door of the estate, the grandfather clock read 5:15 a.m. The massive kitchen was dark, save for the sound of Evelyn sliding a pot onto the stove. She turned around, saw me, and froze for a second. Her sharp, cold eyes scanned me from head to toe, searching for anything out of place. Lauren, where have you been at this hour? Her voice was as acidic as ever. I shrank back, keeping my head bowed. I went out to the garden. I felt so sick last night and couldn't sleep, so I took a walk to get some air. She scoffed, not missing a beat. The house is in mourning, and you're wandering around outside in the dark like a ghost. If the neighbors see you, they'll talk. I kept my eyes on the floor. I'm sorry, Evelyn. Hearing the word sorry leave my lips made my chest physically ache. What did I have to apologize for? My father had just died. I had cried my eyes out and suffered insomnia, yet I still had to bow my head and apologize just to survive in this house. Right then, Carter walked down the grand staircase. He wore a casual t-shirt and shorts, his face looking relaxed and refreshed, like a man who had just enjoyed a fantastic night's sleep. He glanced at me and grimaced. You look terrible. Haven't you looked in a mirror? I swallowed the desperate urge to cry right in front of him. I didn't sleep last night. Carter let out a long yawn. Last night I had a late dinner with some important clients and had a few too many drinks. I probably won't make it to your family's house today. You handle things and pass on my condolences to everyone. I stared out the window, terrified that if I looked at him, I would collapse from sheer rage. Clients? What kind of clients require a beachfront resort in Cabo with a mistress? But I had to pretend. Pretend I knew absolutely nothing. Okay, I'll tell them, I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. Evelyn immediately chimed in. Carter is a busy executive with 1,000 things on his plate. Your family has plenty of people over there to manage things. Don't force your husband to run back and forth. If this were yesterday, I would have choked back my tears and stayed silent. But this morning, there was no sadness left in my heart, only a bitterness that chilled me to the bone. Yet, I forced it down. I needed them to think I was weak, naive, and completely clueless. I understand, I replied softly. Evelyn had no idea that at that exact moment, an invisible war had officially begun in my mind, a war they had forced me into. The morning memorial service commenced. I greeted the guests, my eyes swollen from crying, but my mind never dropped its guard. Reverend Thomas arrived early again, fingering his rosary beads, murmuring prayers, his face looking so benevolent it was grotesquely fake. He circled the altar, casually slipping donation envelopes into his pocket as if it were his divine right. Watching him, a chill crawled up my spine. He was the one who had directly brought the fake ashes into my home. He had lied without blinking in front of hundreds of people. He was an accessory to attempted murder, yet here he stood, posing as a holy man. I stood perfectly still, a suffocating rage threatening to burst from my chest. My dad was alive, hiding in fear for his life. And the people who wanted him dead were strutting around right in front of me. I told myself, Lauren, from today onward, you are no longer the obedient wife. You are the person who will make them terrified to look you in the eye. But to do that, I had to start by appearing incredibly fragile, foolish, and harmless. Because only when their guard was completely down could I strike where it hurt the most. This silent war was brutal, and I had just taken my first step onto the battlefield. My father's memorial lasted until the late afternoon. The house was packed with people expressing their deepest sympathies, everyone except the very people who should have stood by my side during my darkest hour. My husband, Carter, and my mother-in-law, Evelyn. One was vacationing with his mistress, and the other was present, but as cold as an iceberg. As evening approached, I faked exhaustion and asked to be excused to my room. Evelyn looked me up and down, then pointed to a cold compress. Wipe your face, Lauren. The swelling is embarrassing. People will think we're mistreating you. Her voice was sweeter than usual, but her eyes were as sharp as razor blades. I knew she was testing me. I bowed my head, taking the compress, and replied softly, "Thank you, Evelyn." Once inside my room, I locked the door as quietly as possible, my heart hammering against my ribs. All day long, I had played the role of the devastated, helpless daughter so intensely my nerves were frayed. But I had to stay sharp. My dad was in hiding, and I had no idea how far the people trying to kill him were willing to go. I sat on the edge of the bed, taking a deep breath. Theo had texted to say my dad was sleeping and stable. As long as he was safe, I could keep moving forward. Just as I lay back, I heard voices filtering through the wall from Evelyn's adjacent sitting room. Her voice was low, but in this old historic house, sound traveled easily through the vents. Every word struck my ears like a hammer. Does she suspect anything yet? The next voice was Carter's. I jumped. When did he even get back to the house? She's an idiot, Mom. She's too busy crying and playing the grieving daughter. Her brain can't process anything else. My hands clenched the bedsheets until my knuckles turned white. Evelyn scoffed. If she were smart, I wouldn't have let you marry her. Don't worry, we need to execute this cleanly. Sterling Enterprises is a gold mine. It would be a shame if we didn't take it all. I felt like my insides were being boiled alive. Not only did they try to murder my father, not only did they abandon me in my misery, but they spoke about me like I was just a disposable tool. Carter continued, his tone chillingly casual. But what about my father-in-law? Are the cremation papers absolutely bulletproof, Mom? Then, a third voice chimed in. A voice so familiar it made the hairs on my arms stand up. Reverend Thomas, he whispered. I handled everything. The ashes were delivered following strict protocol. No one can verify them. There are plenty of unclaimed John Does in the city morgue. All it took was timing the cremation perfectly. I bit my hand to muffle my sobs. It really was him. He had swapped a stranger's ashes for my father's. Evelyn lowered her voice. You did well, Thomas. When this is finalized, the family won't forget your contribution. But you must keep your mouth shut. Reverend Thomas let out a greasy chuckle. With a family as generous as yours, Evelyn, I'd be a fool to breathe a word. My limbs went ice cold. He had received massive donations and favors from my father for years. Yet, for money and power, he willingly joined the plot to murder him. Carter spoke up again. But what about Lauren? If she finds out about this, everything goes up in smoke. Evelyn replied instantly. What could she possibly find out? She trusts the ashes Thomas brought back more than she trusts herself. Let her cry for a few days, and then she'll go right back to serving us. Carter laughed coldly. You're right, Mom. If I just sweet-talk her a bit, she'll follow me blindly like she always does. I bit my lip so hard it bled. So, for all these years, Carter's gentleness and care were nothing but a mask. And my mother-in-law merely saw me as a maid to be ordered around. They didn't view me as family. They didn't even view me as a human being with feelings. Reverend Thomas's voice echoed again. But remember, the conglomerate hasn't legally transferred yet. If Arthur's original succession documents surface, his daughter has full inheritance rights. You have to deal with the girl. My heart stopped. Deal with her? Evelyn let out a dry, rattling laugh. Don't worry, Thomas. This daughter-in-law of mine. If I want her to be obedient, she will be. If she isn't, well, there are ways to handle that too. I couldn't listen anymore. My ears were ringing, my heart squeezed by an invisible, suffocating hand. I bolted upright, backing away from the wall as if recoiling from a wild beast. In the dark, I covered my mouth, forcing down the sobs so I wouldn't make a sound. They were planning to kill me. They were planning to steal everything. They treated human lives like worthless trash. I shuddered, thinking of my dad. If I hadn't gone to the cemetery last night, if he hadn't texted me, he would have been buried as a pile of fake ashes, and I would undoubtedly be their next target. Footsteps approached from Evelyn's room. I scrambled back to the bed, diving under the covers and pulling them over my head. My heart beat so fast I could hear it echoing in my own chest. The doorknob to my room turned slowly. The door creaked open, and a silhouette stood in the doorway, watching me for a few agonizing seconds before pulling the door shut. I didn't know how they were looking at me in that moment, but I knew one thing for certain. They had marked me as an obstacle, and obstacles are meant to be eliminated. In that very moment, I realized my life was about to change forever. I couldn't be gentle anymore. I couldn't endure anymore. Because one moment of weakness would cost me everything. In the suffocating silence, I clenched my fists and made a silent vow. Lauren, from now on, you live differently. You aren't just going to save your father. You are going to save yourself. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a heavy head, having spent the entire night processing the horrific confessions I wasn't supposed to hear. The early morning sun peeked through the wooden blinds, dust motes dancing in the light like fine rain. I sat up, took a deep breath, and forced myself to regain my composure. I had to act. I had to play the role of the oblivious, grieving daughter-in-law. It was the only way they wouldn't raise their guard. When I walked down to the kitchen, Evelyn was already sitting there, her hair neatly pinned, her face completely serene, as if that terrifying midnight conversation had never happened. She looked at me and smirked. You look a bit better today, Lauren. I bowed my head, my voice soft. Yes. I feel a little better, Evelyn. I turned to walk away, but she called me back. We have a lot to do today. Go attend to the guests in the parlor. A woman shouldn't mope around forever. People will laugh at you for being so weak. I pressed my lips together so hard I almost tasted blood again, but my voice remained perfectly gentle. Yes, I understand, Evelyn. It's just like the old saying, use softness to bind tightly. To defeat evil people, sometimes you have to be soft, feign weakness, so they underestimate you. By noon, I began carefully observing everyone's eyes. When the stream of mourners momentarily thinned out, I stepped out onto the porch. The midday sun hit the thick trails of incense smoke, turning them opaque. Every person who walked in or out looked at me with deep pity. Poor girl, barely married a few years, and now she's lost her father. But no one knew my pain was infinitely worse than they imagined. I stood there, maintaining my exhausted facade, carefully hiding the fierce vigilance pulsing through my veins. I watched Evelyn pacing, making phone calls, her face full of calculation. I watched Carter standing by the gate, looking at his phone far more than he looked at the guests. And Reverend Thomas appeared out of nowhere, fingering his rosary, though his eyes constantly darted toward the donation box. I absorbed all these images. Every sideways glance, every casual remark became a clue. Suddenly, a realization hit me. All three of them, Evelyn, Carter, and Reverend Thomas, were too calm, far too calm for a fatal car crash. Too calm for a massive memorial service, and specifically, too calm about the sudden death of the man who essentially funded their lives. To me, this calmness was the ultimate proof of their orchestration. That afternoon, I decided to return to Sterling Enterprises headquarters under the guise of the grieving daughter. Around 3 p.m., I said to Evelyn, "Evelyn, could I go to the corporate office to pick up some of my dad's personal files? I want to keep them as mementos." She looked at me, the sharp gaze of a woman who had spent years navigating cutthroat social circles, unable to hide a flicker of suspicion. "Why do you need files at a time like this? You should be mourning properly." I bowed my head, my voice wavering, as if on the verge of tears. I just want to hold on to something of his." She stared at me for a long time before sighing. "Fine, but be quick about it." As I turned my back, I saw her face relax, in the reflection of the hallway mirror. She still thought I was the same clueless idiot. At Sterling Enterprises, everyone was stunned to see me. Executives bowed their heads, their eyes full of sympathy. "Lauren, how are you holding up? We are so deeply sorry about the CEO." I nodded slightly, my voice choked but tearless. "Thank you all. My father wouldn't want me to be weak right now." I walked straight to my father's executive suite. As I pushed the door open, the familiar scent of rich mahogany hit me, making my chest ache. The leather chair he always sat in, the perfectly organized documents on his desk, it looked as if he had just been there yesterday, reviewing contracts. I whispered into the empty room, "Dad, I promise I will bring the truth back to this place." Theo stepped in behind me and locked the door. He spoke in a low voice. "Lauren, I brought a secure USB drive. I can extract some of the files they tried to delete." I nodded. We began combing through my father's hard drive. Many folders had been wiped clean, but fortunately, not all of them. Theo gasped softly. "Look at this. These are the diverted contracts. This digital signature. It's Carter's." My hands shook. Then, Theo opened another hidden file. He skimmed it rapidly. Massive wire transfers to Reverend Thomas's private parish accounts. The amounts are 5 times the normal charitable donations. I felt the back of my neck freeze. Theo's voice trembled. "Lauren, this is the smoking gun." I took a deep breath. "Save everything. Do not miss a single bite." I looked around the grand office. My father had used this room to protect his empire for decades. Now, I had to step up and finish the job for him. That evening, the drive back to the estate felt like walking into a wolf's den. It had been a long, exhausting day. As soon as I walked through the door, I saw Carter lounging on the sofa, his feet propped up on the coffee table, acting like the master of the house. He glared at me. "Where were you all afternoon? Don't you know how to help my mom with the guests?" I swallowed my rage. "I'm sorry." I went to the office to grab some of Dad's personal files. Evelyn walked out of the parlor, raising an eyebrow. "Files? Why did you have to go?" "You're supposed to be in mourning, Lauren." I kept my eyes on the floor. I just missed him so much. I forced my eyes to well up with tears. I saw Evelyn's gaze soften a fraction. Gentle people are easy to bully, she thought. But I was different now. I was acting, and they were buying it completely. That night, as I lay in bed, I could hear the heavy, rapid thumping of my own heart stronger and more resolute than ever before. I knew that the moment I walked out of that cemetery yesterday, I had stepped onto a battlefield with no retreat. And I, the submissive daughter-in-law, the gentle woman they all looked down upon, was going to make them pay for every single thing they had done. The next morning was overcast, the biting wind chilling me to the bone. The half-burnt incense on the altar was still smoking. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my slightly messy hair, trying to make my eyes look as exhausted as possible, the exact picture of a daughter devastated by her father's death, mentally shattered. But deep inside those eyes was a razor-sharp clarity and an ironclad resolve that no one could detect. Today was the day I had to walk into Sterling Enterprises. It was the exact time my husband's faction was holding a secret board meeting to seize control of the company. I knew full well that if I made even a tiny misstep, they would view me as an obstacle and eliminate me, exactly as they had discussed. I wore a simple black morning dress and a traditional black veil. When I stepped into the living room, Evelyn looked me up and down. "Lauren, the company will be full of important people today. Make sure you behave properly. We are in mourning. Don't give anyone a reason to judge us." I bowed my head submissively. "Yes, Evelyn, I understand." In my heart, I thought, if playing by the rules keeps me alive today, I will gladly endure it a little longer. At the corporate headquarters, the atmosphere was thick with conspiracy. The moment I walked into the grand lobby, several pairs of eyes locked onto me. My father's loyal executives rushed over. "Lauren, are you okay?" "We are so devastated about Arthur." I nodded slightly, my voice choked but tearless. "Thank you." My father wouldn't want me to be weak right now. I walked straight toward the main executive boardroom. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear Carter's voice, sharp and authoritative. "The funeral isn't over, but business cannot halt. As family, I will be stepping in as interim CEO." I stood outside the door for a few seconds, took a massive breath, and pushed the door wide open. Chairs scraped against the floor as several board members jolted in surprise. Carter's eyes darted toward me, flashing with panic before he quickly regained his composure. "Lauren, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be mourning." I looked at him, my eyes projecting deep sorrow, but my mind was as sharp as a scalpel. "Please, continue." I just wanted to hear what couldn't wait. My father hasn't even been gone a week, yet everyone seems to be in such a rush. The entire boardroom fell dead silent. No one expected me to show up at this exact moment. Evelyn, sitting in a leather chair toward the back, looked slightly pale but forced an authoritative tone. "Lauren, this is corporate business. You shouldn't interfere." I walked slowly to the massive mahogany table, placing my freezing hands flat against the wood. My voice was quiet, but every syllable was crystalline. "I understand. But my father left a will, and until that will is formally executed, executive authority cannot just be claimed arbitrarily." A few senior managers exchanged glances. They knew I was legally right. Carter gritted his teeth. "Lauren, stop causing a scene." I offered a faint, hollow smile, my first smile, since I had cried myself dry. "I'm not causing a scene. I'm just reminding everyone of the law. Besides, there are far too many anomalies surrounding my father's accident." Right on cue, the phone in my pocket vibrated. A text from Theo. "The police are in the lobby. They said they received an anonymous tip." I didn't know who sent the tip, but I knew this was the exact turning point I needed. I looked up, my voice mild. "Oh, it seems the police are downstairs. I wonder if it has to do with corporate embezzlement, or perhaps the good Reverend who brought my father's ashes back." Reverend Thomas, who was sitting in the back row, turned a ghastly shade of white. He tugged nervously at his collar, sweat soaking into his clerical shirt. The boardroom instantly plunged into a suffocating, terrifying tension. Carter shot to his feet. "What are you implying, Lauren?" I looked him dead in the eye, my voice slow and lethal. "I'm not implying anything. I'm just stating facts. We all know the crash happened late at night off a remote cliff. Yet, somehow, the body was recovered, processed, and fully cremated with complete paperwork in less than 24 hours. How is that possible? Evelyn gripped the edge of the table, her lips trembling. Watch your mouth, Lauren. I paused for a second, then continued. I only want full transparency. If anyone in this company has been making suspicious wire transfers to a parish or funneling money out of corporate contracts. Before I could finish my sentence, Reverend Thomas jumped out of his chair, panicking. Excuse me, I have an urgent matter at the church. I must leave. No one said a word, but everyone understood. Only the guilty run. Carter rushed over, grabbing my wrist and squeezing it hard. Shut up. Do not ruin my plans. I stared at him, my eyes devoid of any emotion. I'm not ruining anything. I'm just helping everyone see clearly. Just then, a security guard opened the door and poked his head in. Excuse me, but the police are asking several individuals to come down for questioning. In that exact moment, I saw the sheer terror in the eyes of my husband's faction, and I knew that I had just won the first battle of this war. After the explosive boardroom meeting at Sterling Enterprises, the atmosphere back at the estate was like the eerie calm before a hurricane. On the surface, it was quiet, but underneath, violent undercurrents were raging. I could feel it. They were intensely suspicious of me now. They knew I was no longer the naive, fragile daughter-in-law I used to be. That evening, I was in my room folding some black mourning clothes when Carter barged in. He slammed the door so hard I flinched. Lauren, what the hell were you doing at the company today? He snarled, stepping into my personal space. I looked up, maintaining my facade of innocent grief. I was just asking questions I didn't understand. My dad is dead, Carter. Stop acting stupid. Carter cut me off, his eyes turning black with rage. This is high-level corporate business. You do not have permission to meddle in things you don't understand. In that split second, I saw clearly that his eyes held absolutely zero love for me anymore. There was only threat, irritation, and fear. He was terrified I knew too much. I kept my voice dead calm. I just want justice for my dad. Carter's face twitched, whether from anger or anxiety. I couldn't tell. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Lauren, do not make me do something drastic. That warning sent a block of ice down my spine. I stared at the floor so he couldn't see the terror rising within me. I understand, I murmured. Carter turned on his heel and slammed the door behind him. The entire room shuddered in response to his fury. Later that night, I went down to the kitchen to get a glass of water. As I passed the grand parlor, I heard Evelyn's voice. I immediately flattened myself against the hallway pillar, my heart hammering against my ribs. There were 3 people in the parlor: Evelyn, Carter, and Richard Vance, the corrupt corporate partner my father had suspected. That girl is becoming a massive problem, Richard growled, his voice raspy. She knows too much, way too fast. Evelyn let out a heavy sigh. I never expected this. I thought she was docile, but she's like a dog with a bone, the way she challenged us in the boardroom today. She's genuinely dangerous. Mom, she has a USB drive, Carter gritted out. I'm absolutely certain she accessed Arthur's hard drive. My chest tightened painfully. They knew. They knew I had the evidence that terrified them. Richard Vance chuckled coldly. We have no other choice. Letting her live any longer is a liability. I lost all sensation in my legs. What do you mean? Evelyn asked slowly. We take care of her. Permanently, Richard stated bluntly. I slapped both hands over my mouth to stifle a sob. I, the daughter-in-law they used to praise for being well-behaved, had now become a thorn they needed to extract and destroy. Carter didn't object. He just said one sentence that froze the blood in my veins. I'll handle the logistics. Just make sure you aren't tied to it, Mom. Evelyn nodded, looking deep in thought. But it has to be clean. No loose ends, no suspicions. Richard's voice grew darker. I have a guy. Scarface Vince. He specializes in making people disappear. Without a trace. I recognized that name. Vince was a notorious local enforcer connected to organized crime, frequently mentioned in underground news blogs. If they unleashed him on me, I wouldn't stand a chance. The dark plot took shape right then and there. Near midnight, I heard the front gate click open. I peeked through the curtains. Richard was walking to his car, while Evelyn and Carter stood on the porch seeing him off. "So, tomorrow night is the deadline, right?" Carter whispered. Richard nodded. "Yes. Tell her to take the memorial donation checks to Reverend Thomas's chapel. Vince will intercept her on the way." My knees buckled. I had to grip the windowsill to keep from collapsing. Their plan was to lure me out alone, kidnap me, and execute me. I was shaking so violently I felt like throwing up, but I bit down hard on my lip. I cannot break down. I have to survive to save my dad, and I have to drag these monsters into the light. As soon as I got back to my bed, my phone lit up with a text from Theo. "Lauren, your dad says the security cameras near the warehouse hideout have been tampered with. Someone is tracking him. Be careful." Not only was I in mortal danger, but my father was being hunted too. I quickly texted back, "Keep him secured. Lock down the perimeter. If I don't answer my phone tomorrow night, call the police immediately." I turned off my phone, my body trembling, but my heart was harder than it had ever been. I was no longer the submissive wife who only knew how to endure. To survive, I had to be smarter than them, faster than them, and far more ruthless. I muttered to myself an old proverb. To defeat the enemy outside, you must first conquer the fear inside. I lay awake the entire night. The estate felt perfectly peaceful on the surface, but the air was thick with conspiracy, murder, and the ultimate betrayal. I knew tomorrow they would strike, and it would be the greatest test of my entire life. The following evening, the sky was a bruised, stormy purple. The wind howled through the massive oak trees lining the estate's driveway. The unnatural biting cold made me shiver, but what chilled me more was the trap my husband's family had set for me. They were going to lure me out and hand me over to Vince, a ruthless thug hired to do their dirty work. I knew they were going to strike tonight, but I also knew I had to walk right into it. If I avoided this trap, they would just create another one, perhaps something even more horrific. Around 7 p.m., I was cleaning up in the kitchen when Carter walked in. He let out a theatrical, exhausted sigh. "Lauren, could you run these memorial donation checks over to Reverend Thomas's chapel for me? I have an emergency conference call." My heart slammed against my ribs. It was exactly what Richard Vance had instructed the night before. I looked up, forcing a look of naive hesitation. Why? Why do I have to go alone? It's dark and getting late. Carter frowned, his tone immediately irritated. "You're an adult, aren't you? I told you I have an emergency. If you don't want to help, fine, forget it." Evelyn glided in from the parlor, her voice as smooth as velvet. "Lauren, just run over there and come right back. The chapel is only a few miles away." A good wife helps her husband when he's stressed. I looked at them, feeling like I was staring at two complete strangers, but I bowed my head, my voice dropping. "Okay, I'll go." As I walked toward the front door, I caught a glimpse of Evelyn out of the corner of my eye. The corner of her mouth twitched upwards into a faint, icy smirk. I knew that in their minds, I was walking out of that door for the last time. I walked down the long driveway toward the main road. The second I was out of sight of the estate's windows, I pulled out my phone and frantically texted Theo. "They are making their move. Turn on my GPS tracker. Keep Dad safe. If I don't answer, call the police." Before I could hit send, a nondescript cargo van screeched to a halt right next to me. Before I could even react, a heavy black canvas bag was shoved over my head, and a thick arm locked around my throat from behind. I was violently shoved into the back of the van. The doors slammed shut. The air was suffocating, reeking of stale sweat and gasoline. I tried to scream, but a heavy hand clamped over my mouth. A gravelly, terrifying voice growled in my ear. "Shut up, you scream. I'll tie you up right now." It was Vince. I recognized his voice from the underground crime blogs I'd read. The van sped off, bouncing over rough roads. I was thrown around the metal floor, my limbs aching as if they were being ripped apart. But over the chaos, I clearly heard the man in the passenger seat say, "Vance said to finish her quick. Make sure this bitch never opens her mouth again." I bit my lip so hard it bled. My heart hammered wildly. Everything was pitch black, and it felt like 100 invisible hands were dragging me down into hell. After about 30 agonizing minutes, the van stopped. I was dragged out. I could hear crickets chirping, smell damp earth, and the distinct scent of rotting canvas. We had arrived at some abandoned warehouse. They ripped the black bag off my head. The dim, sickly yellow light revealed the brutal, scarred faces of my kidnappers. I was shaking, not from fear, but from pure, unadulterated rage. Rage that they truly believed my life was as worthless as a dirty rag. Vince shoved me hard into a splintered wooden chair. "You're a nosy little bitch. You know too much." I didn't answer. I stared straight into his eyes without flinching. He smirked. "Got some guts. But guts won't save you. Today is your last day." The heavy metal door of the warehouse screeched open. Evelyn walked in first, followed closely by Reverend Thomas in his clerical collar, his face gaunt, but his eyes darting around nervously. And finally, Carter. The three people who were once my family now stood before me, revealing their true, demonic faces. Evelyn crossed her arms and stood right in front of me. "Lauren, you have disappointed me so much." I gave a cold, bitter laugh. "I think you mean I became a thorn in your side." Reverend Thomas tugged at his collar, his voice shaking. "She knows about the fake ashes. She knows everything. If we don't finish this, we're all dead." I glared at him. A priest who swaps ashes. A priest who accessories to murder. How do you even show your face to your congregation? He stumbled backward, his face turning ghostly pale. Evelyn slammed her hand down on a nearby table. "Shut your mouth. You've been defiant ever since you found out. You think you're so smart, but you're nothing but the trash my son picked up off the street." Carter stepped forward, grabbing my chin and squeezing it painfully hard. "Lauren, I warned you. You should have just played the good, obedient wife." I stared into his eyes, completely devoid of any emotion. "You're only good when you're hiding behind your mother's skirt. To me, you're nothing but a coward." Carter raised his hand to slap me. But in that exact second, I slammed my finger down on the tiny panic button hidden under my belt. The GPS beacon I had set up with Theo was instantly activated. Somewhere in the distance, the roar of heavy engines erupted. The sound of boots sprinting on gravel, men shouting. The warehouse door was violently kicked open, exploding off its hinges. Blinding tactical flashlights pierced the gloom. A booming, authoritative voice echoed through the massive space. "Seattle PD SWAT. Nobody move. You are all under arrest for kidnapping and conspiracy to commit murder." Vince jumped up, but before he could take a single step, he was tackled to the ground by a heavily armored officer. Reverend Thomas dropped to his knees, clutching his head and screaming, "I just helped. They forced me." Evelyn's face drained of all color, her legs giving out as she collapsed. Carter was instantly pinned against the wall, so shocked he couldn't even form a word. The warehouse was absolute chaos, but every single secret was instantly laid bare at the scene. Phones, bank ledgers, forged documents, everything fell into the hands of the police within minutes. I sat tied to the wooden chair, but tears were finally streaming down my face. Not from terror, but from overwhelming relief. I lived, I survived, and in the end, they had hand-delivered the evidence of their own destruction straight to the police. I closed my eyes and whispered to the air, "Dad, I did it." I remained completely still on the rotting wooden chair, my hands bound tightly in front of me. The rough rope burned my wrists, the friction rubbing them raw and bloody. But when the warehouse doors were kicked off their hinges, blinding tactical flashlights slicing through the darkness, and the heavy boots of the SWAT team swarming the room, I felt as if I had been violently yanked back from the deepest, darkest abyss of my life. In a fraction of a second, the death that had been staring me in the face shattered like a fragile nightmare. Vince was slammed face first into the concrete floor in half a second. He howled, "I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything." But the SWAT officers didn't give him a chance to speak. Two massive tactical officers pinned him down, wrenching his arms behind his back. Carter stood frozen, his face a sickly shade of green. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his jaw hanging open, utterly speechless. Even as the cold steel handcuffs clicked tightly around his wrists, he looked like a man who had just been struck by lightning. Evelyn was slowly backing away, her hands trembling violently as she gripped the edge of a rusty table to stay upright. I had never seen her look so utterly terrified. She stammered, "No, no, it wasn't me. I only. But her pathetic excuses were completely drowned out by the commanding voice of the detective, reading them their Miranda rights. Reverend Thomas was shaking so uncontrollably, he nearly fell over. His clerical collar and dark suit suddenly looked absurdly comical. He clutched his rosary beads, mumbling nonsensical prayers. "Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. I only helped, I was coerced." A detective immediately confiscated his phone and a stack of papers from a leather satchel he had strapped across his chest. The detective skimmed a few pages, then looked up, his eyes lethally sharp. "We have a ledger here detailing wire transfers. Huge sums from accounts belonging to Richard Vance, Evelyn Davis, and Carter Davis. Would you care to explain these amounts, Reverend?" Reverend Thomas's face turned ashen. He collapsed onto the warehouse floor, his hands shaking violently. I only accepted them as charitable parish donations." The detective's voice went ice cold. "Charitable donations of hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time? And what about the notes detailing replacement ashes? It's all explicitly written in this ledger." Hearing that sent a chill down my spine. The idiot had kept a literal ledger. Every bribe he took, every dirty deed he executed, it was all documented. God truly was watching. An officer approached me carefully and cut the ropes binding my wrists. "Lauren, ma'am, are you injured?" I shook my head, though my legs were still trembling. Theo sprinted in from outside, his face completely pale with panic. "Lauren, are you okay? Did they hurt you?" I looked at Theo, seeing his red, tear-filled eyes, and my heart softened. When I thought I had no way out, Theo was the only person I could trust with my life. I breathed heavily. "I'm still here. Because of you." Theo bit his lip, clenching his fists. "You have to thank Marcus, too. He saw someone lurking around the warehouse where your dad is hiding and called me immediately. I knew something was wrong, so I activated your GPS tracker. Thank God the police precinct was close by." Hearing that, I felt like I had been reborn. A female officer escorted me out of the warehouse. The freezing night wind hit my face, but it only made me feel more alive, more lucid. I glanced back at the three people who used to call me family. They were being marched out in handcuffs, heads bowed in disgrace. One was crying, one was terrified, one was in sheer shock, but not a single one of their faces elicited an ounce of pity from me. This was the price they had to pay. The police took me back to the precinct to take my official statement. I recounted everything, from the midnight text from my father, the emergency board meeting, to the kidnapping plot tonight. When I finished, the lead detective sitting across from me nodded gravely. "Lauren, your statement perfectly corroborates the digital evidence we just recovered. I need you to prepare yourself. This isn't just a kidnapping case. We are looking at a highly organized conspiracy to commit murder." I pressed my lips together. I knew. I had seen the absolute point of no return cruelty in their eyes. When I stepped out of the interrogation room, Marcus was waiting in the hallway. The middle-aged man, who had driven my father for over 20 years, looked at me with tears streaming down his face. "Lauren, I'm so sorry. I failed to protect you." I shook my head and grasped his hands. "Marcus, you saved me tonight. I will never forget that for the rest of my life." Outside the precinct, the wind was howling. I looked up at the pitch-black sky. I had never felt stronger than I did at that exact moment. Even though my body was exhausted and my legs still shook, I thought of my father. I thought of everything he had endured, and the moment he would finally step back into the light to reveal the truth. Tonight, I survived. But tomorrow, justice would finally take our side. A brutal, but hopeful, new chapter was waiting for us. The next morning, Theo and I were called back to the police headquarters to provide supplementary statements. As I walked into the waiting room, I saw a silhouette sitting with his back to me. The salt and pepper hair and the broad shoulders were so familiar that my heart practically leaped out of my chest. The man stood up and turned around. It was my father. I choked up, barely managing to cry out, "Dad!" He smiled, though his eyes were red and bloodshot. He opened his arms, and I sprinted into them like a child who hadn't seen her parent in years. The lingering smell of antiseptic on his clothes, mixed with the damp earth from his days in hiding it all, made me feel a profound, indescribable mix of heartbreak and love. He patted my back gently. "My sweet girl. I'm okay. You did so well, Lauren." I looked up at his gaunt face. The look of despair from the cemetery was gone, replaced by the fierce determination of a man preparing to reclaim his empire and his honor. He put his hands on my shoulders. "Today, I am going to tell them everything." I nodded. Theo, standing nearby, bowed his head respectfully, his voice shaking with emotion. My dad smiled and thanked Theo as if he were his own son. We were ushered into the lead detective's office. On the table sat stacks of files, forged documents, and the confiscated phones of Reverend Thomas, Evelyn, and Carter, all sealed in evidence bags. The atmosphere was incredibly heavy, yet strictly professional. The detective began, "Mr. Sterling, we have reviewed the entire statement from your daughter and the recovered evidence. Please walk us through the entire sequence of events from the beginning to complete the case file." My dad took a deep breath and began. "About a week before the crash, I noticed massive discrepancies in several corporate contracts. Huge sums of money were being funneled out of Sterling Enterprises without justification. I was suspicious, so I began quietly auditing the files. I listened, my chest tightening." My dad continued. "I discovered forged signatures on 2 major international contracts. Carter had forged my signature. That sentence plunged the room into absolute silence. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. But I fought back the tears. This was the time to listen to the truth, not the time for weakness. I called Carter into my office privately," my dad said. "He denied it at first, then panicked. Before I could formally terminate him, he ran straight to his mother. Evelyn immediately contacted Richard Vance, and the conspiracy began." The detective asked, "Are you certain they conspired to murder you?" My dad nodded firmly. "Yes. I overheard a phone call between them. Richard Vance said he would clear the road, and Evelyn insisted it had to be done cleanly. They even mentioned Reverend Thomas. They said they needed a convincing accident, and the ashes had to be delivered by someone unimpeachable." I gripped the arms of my chair until my knuckles were white. They had calculated every single step to flawlessly execute a murder and cover it up. My dad spoke slowly, as if reliving every horrific detail that had haunted his days in hiding. My SUV was tampered with beforehand, and Marcus's coffee was drugged. I felt the brakes failing and shouted for Marcus to pull over, but he had already passed out. As the car careened toward the cliff edge, I threw myself out the passenger door. "Thank God," I whispered, tears dropping onto the back of my hand. "A hunter living off the grid in the woods found me," my dad continued. "But I didn't dare reveal who I was. I knew they would send people back to scour the crash site. I hid in the woods for 3 days until I heard the news that Reverend Thomas had returned with an urn and officially pronounced me dead. I knew then I had to be smarter than ever." The detective asked, "Who tipped you off about the funeral arrangements so you could contact your daughter?" My dad looked at me with a faint smile. "I overheard some hikers talking about the massive memorial service for the CEO of Sterling Enterprises. I managed to find an old burner phone in the hunter's cabin and texted Lauren." I squeezed my dad's hand tightly. Those few lines of text had saved my entire life. The detective pushed a stack of files forward. "Mr. Sterling, we have the ledger from Reverend Thomas's phone detailing the exact wire transfers, along with a voice recording where he accepts the job to procure the fake ashes. And in Evelyn Davis's purse, we found the forged asset transfer documents." My dad exhaled a breath of relief laced with profound sorrow. "So they have no way out." I looked at the evidence files and shuddered. The people who used to smile at me, eat dinner at the same table as me, and call me family, were the very people who plotted to murder my biological father and then tried to assassinate me. The detective concluded, "We will be filing multiple felony charges. You and Lauren will be placed under police protection for the time being. This case is going to generate massive media attention given the corporate figures involved, the fake clergyman, and the financial fraud." My dad nodded. I felt a massive weight lift off my chest, though it wasn't completely gone. My dad was alive. I was alive, but a massive tidal wave was still waiting for us. As we walked out of the precinct, My dad placed his hand on my shoulder. "Lauren, I am so sorry for putting you through this." I shook my head and hugged him tight. "Dad, if it weren't for you, I would have truly been an orphan." He smiled gently, his eyes warm like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "From now on, we won't let anyone step on us ever again." Out in the courtyard, the wind whipped the trees. I looked up at a patch of clearing sky, feeling a sense of relief I had never known before. It felt like, after a torturously long hurricane, I was finally seeing the first rays of sunlight. The war was entering its final phase. A phase where my father, the man they thought they had killed, would stand tall and face them in the light, and I would stand right beside him, acting as the shield he had been for me my entire life. My father returned to Sterling Enterprises on a cloudy morning, yet the air felt incredibly crisp and clear. It was as if the sky itself knew today was a day of reckoning. When the police escort pulled up to the corporate headquarters, dozens of executives and employees were already waiting in the lobby. Everyone froze in absolute shock when they saw him step out. Flesh and blood. Whispers erupted across the marble floor. The CEO is alive. So the cremation story was a total lie. My God, who would do something so evil? I stepped out first, holding my dad's arm to support him. Every eye was glued to us, a mix of joy and sheer disbelief. No one could fathom that the man whose ashes had supposedly been delivered to his home was standing right here, looking dignified, albeit noticeably thinner. My dad raised a hand slightly to quiet the crowd. His voice was deep and steady. "Thank you all for your concern over these past few weeks. I have returned today to make everything clear." The lobby went dead silent. The main executive boardroom had been prepped at the request of the police. When we walked in, I saw Evelyn, Carter, and Reverend Thomas sitting in a row, heavily guarded by officers. Their faces were chalk white. The arrogant elites who had treated me like garbage were now sitting with their heads bowed, like condemned prisoners awaiting execution. When Carter saw my dad, his eyes widened in horror, then immediately dropped, like a cornered animal realizing it had nowhere left to run. Evelyn was trembling so violently she couldn't even sit up straight. Reverend Thomas was muttering prayers under his breath, his face completely vacant. I sat next to my dad. Even though I had grown immensely strong over the last few days, a part of me still felt the sting of their betrayal, like an unhealed wound. The lead detective stood up to officially begin the meeting. "Today, we are holding this briefing to publicly clarify the truth surrounding the attempted murder of Arthur Sterling, the fabrication of his remains, and to present the evidence regarding corporate embezzlement, forged contracts, and conspiracy to commit murder." The tension in the room was suffocating. Every word struck the room like a gavel. My dad stood up and walked slowly to the podium. He gripped the edges, looking out at the executives, the people who had followed him throughout his journey building the conglomerate. "I, Arthur Sterling, never imagined I would have to stand before you in circumstances like these." He paused, his throat catching. I saw tears welling in his eyes. I was targeted. A fatal accident was staged. And what breaks my heart the most is that the perpetrators were the very people I trusted as family. Gasps echoed through the boardroom. Several people covered their mouths in sheer shock. The detective displayed a digital presentation of the evidence. "This is conclusive proof that Evelyn Davis, her son Carter, Richard Vance, and Reverend Thomas colluded. They utilized the body of an unidentified homeless man to create fake cremated remains, purely to cover up the attempted assassination of Mr. Sterling." A female executive burst into tears. How could they do that to him? My dad turned to look directly at Carter. His eyes held no boiling rage, only an ocean of disappointment. "Carter, I treated you like my own son. Yet, your greed drove you to abandon your own humanity." Carter kept his head down. I saw his shoulders shaking violently, though I didn't know if he was shaking from remorse or purely from terror. My dad continued. "And Reverend Thomas, a man I believed possessed a moral compass, turned out to be nothing but a vulture using the church to cloak his crimes. Those who forge human remains to cover up murder will face the absolute maximum penalty of the law." The detective nodded in confirmation. "All individuals involved are currently in federal custody and will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Following the disclosure of their crimes, My dad opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope, the very one I had seen locked in his private safe at home. He held it up, and now I wish to announce the execution of my new, formalized succession plan. The room buzzed again. My dad enunciated every word clearly. All of my voting rights, my estate, and my controlling shares in Sterling Enterprises are officially transferred to my sole daughter, Lauren Sterling. I was stunned. I had no idea my dad had prepared this before the assassination attempt. He continued, his voice turning to steel. As for Carter and Evelyn Davis, I am officially terminating all of their positions, rights, and benefits within this corporation. Effective immediately, they have absolutely no association with Sterling Enterprises. A loud, pathetic sob erupted from Evelyn. She broke down crying, her voice cracking. Arthur, I was wrong. Please, Arthur, don't. My dad shook his head, his eyes sad but unyielding. Those who commit evil must pay the price. Carter bit his lip so hard it bled. Reverend Thomas squeezed his eyes shut, letting out a long, defeated sigh. Every single employee in the boardroom stood up and began applauding, not cheering out of joy, but applauding because absolute justice had finally spoken. I looked at my dad, my chest tight with emotion. All the humiliation, all the agonizing pain of the past few weeks felt somewhat soothed. He turned to me and whispered, "My girl, from now on, you must be strong, not just for me, but for yourself." I nodded, my eyes burning with tears. Yes, from now on, I would live for me. The meeting ended, but it was only the beginning of the villain's total collapse. As for me, I was about to make the most important decision of my life. The morning after the succession announcement, I woke up in my childhood bedroom at my father's mansion. The feeling was entirely different. For the first time in weeks, I heard birds chirping in the oak trees outside, and the soft morning sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains. I was no longer waking up in a state of sheer terror, anxiety, and stress. But my heart still carried a heavy task. Today, I had to do something I should have done a long time ago. I had to return to the Davis estate, the place I once thought was my home, to pack my belongings and face Carter one last time. The grand, wrought iron gates, the manicured hedges. Everything suddenly looked so alien. As soon as I stepped onto the driveway, Evelyn rushed out of the house. She looked utterly haggard, her hair unkempt after a sleepless night. She stood blocking the front door, her eyes looking right through me. Lauren, please listen to me." I stopped walking, keeping my face perfectly calm, and offered a slight, polite nod. "Go ahead, Evelyn." She breathed heavily, her voice shaking with more desperation than I had ever heard from her. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. But this family loved you once, and you loved us. Please, don't be so heartless." I looked at her, realizing I didn't even feel angry anymore. Not because I pitied her, but because my heart had gone completely cold toward her. Once something shatters, it can never be put back together perfectly. Spilled water cannot be gathered back into the glass. I had never felt the truth of that phrase more deeply than right now. I replied softly, "Evelyn, I don't want to hold hatred in my heart for anyone, but after what you did to my father and to me. If I stayed silent, I would be betraying my own soul." She burst into tears, lunging forward to grab my hands. "Give me a chance to fix this, Lauren. Please, I don't want to lose you." I gently pulled my hands away. "I am not losing anything. And you aren't losing anything either. We just aren't family anymore." Just then, Carter walked out of the parlor. He was wearing a white dress shirt, but it was wrinkled and untucked, making him look like a man who had been drinking for days straight. His eyes were bloodshot, his steps unsteady. He looked at me, his voice trembling. "Lauren, please let me speak." I stood still. This was the moment I needed to hear, to finally close the chapter. Carter approached, stopping a few feet away. His shoulders slumped as if all the life had been drained out of him. "I'm sorry. I am so genuinely sorry. I got dragged into it. I was terrified of my mom. I was terrified of Richard Vance." I smirked. For the first time in my life, I realized how pathetic an apology could sound. "Carter, you were terrified of them, But you were never terrified of losing me. I was your wife. I was the person who stood beside you. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Yet, when my dad supposedly died, you were holding another woman's hand in Cabo. When I was so devastated I couldn't even stand, you were plotting to murder my father, to steal his company. Carter broke down crying, the pathetic, choking sobs of a man who had lost everything. Lauren, I was blinded by greed. I was so wrong. Just give me a chance to make it right. I shook my head. I wasn't angry. I didn't blame him anymore. There was simply nothing left to salvage. Carter, in this entire marriage, there wasn't a single day where I was allowed to be a real wife. I lived in constant fear of being judged, fear of being looked down upon, fear of doing something that would upset your mother, and you. You were never my rock. I opened my purse and pulled out the paperwork I had prepared that morning. These are the divorce papers. I've already signed them. All you need to do is sign. Carter stumbled backward, his eyes frantic. No, Lauren, please don't do this. I can change. I promise I'll love you. I'll leave my mom. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, then opened them. My voice was so remarkably serene that it surprised even me. Carter, you can wake a sleeping man, but you can never wake a man who is only pretending to be asleep. The love and loyalty in our marriage. You buried it yourself. Evelyn collapsed onto the porch, wailing. Lauren, I'm begging you. I truly regret everything. I leaned down and helped her stand up. My voice was very light, but I enunciated every word. Evelyn, do you regret it because you actually care about me? Or do you regret it because you're terrified of federal prison? She froze completely. I stood up straight and looked at both of them. Two people who were once my family. I am not going to hold on to resentment, but I have to leave this place. I am choosing to live my own life. Without waiting for another word, I walked inside and packed the few remaining clothes I had left. They had never allowed me to bring much of my own personality into this house, so there was barely anything to take. When I walked back out, Carter was standing in the driveway, watching me in silence. I paused for a brief second, then walked right past him, like walking through a door that was locking forever behind me. As the massive iron gates closed behind me, I heard Evelyn collapse again, and I heard Carter calling my name. But it all faded into the background, drifting away like the distant echoes of a terrible nightmare. I rolled my suitcase down the long, tree-lined street, heading back to my father's house. Every step felt lighter, freer. It was as if a massive boulder I had carried on my chest for years had finally been lifted. I told myself, Lauren, you made the right choice. I had put a permanent end to a toxic marriage, but there was still one final task: finishing the legal prosecution of their crimes. That road still lay ahead. After officially leaving the Davis estate, I moved back in with my dad. The mansion he had built when he was young suddenly felt incredibly warm. The smell of Earl Grey tea, the sound of Marcus sweeping the driveway, Theo walking back and forth handling business for my dad, all of it made me feel like I was finally where I belonged. But I knew this wasn't over. The monsters who orchestrated this nightmare still had to face the justice system, and my dad was going to be the one to stand up and testify against them. A few days later, the district attorney summoned us for an official deposition and confrontation. I went with my dad and Theo. The sky that day was grim, dark clouds rolling in as if signaling that this would be a long, grueling battle. When we walked into the interrogation room, I saw Carter sitting next to a public defender, his face hollow and sunken. Evelyn had wasted away, her hair a frizzy mess, and Reverend Thomas was no longer wearing his clerical collar. He was in a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, an image that drove home the absolute reality of karma. None of them dared to look at me, and they certainly didn't dare look at my dad. My dad walked to his seat and sat down, projecting the commanding presence of a man who had been mentally preparing for this moment for a very long time. The lead prosecutor opened the case file, his voice echoing loudly. We will now begin the official confrontation between Mr. Arthur Sterling and the defendants. The room was dead silent. You could hear the rustle of paper as the prosecutor flipped the pages. According to the sworn statement of the defendant, Carter Davis, I was only following my mother's instructions. She said if my father-in-law held all the power, I would have no future. Does the defendant confirm this statement? Carter kept his head bowed, his voice barely a whisper. Yes. My dad looked at him, his eyes calm but sharp as a knife. Carter, I loved you like a son. If you wanted to leave Sterling Enterprises and strike out on your own, I would have gladly let you go and supported you. But you and your mother chose to murder me to steal something that didn't belong to you. Carter didn't dare look up. He just let out a choked sob, his trembling hands resting on the table. The prosecutor turned to Evelyn. According to confiscated physical evidence, you proactively contacted Richard Vance to orchestrate the accident. How do you explain this? Evelyn burst into tears, completely stripped of her former arrogance. I was only thinking of my son. Arthur always looked down on us. He never gave Carter any real power. I wanted my son to have a position of authority. I never thought it would turn out like this. My dad answered immediately, his voice filled with sorrow, not anger. Evelyn, I never looked down on you. That was entirely in your own head. I simply refused to hand executive power to someone who lacked the competence and the work ethic. That was my fiduciary responsibility. Evelyn went rigid. It was a simple truth that she had intentionally twisted into a vendetta for years. The prosecutor continued. Reverend Thomas, you accepted bribes from Evelyn Davis and Richard Vance to procure fake cremated remains. Do you admit to this? Thomas shook violently, his hands clasped together. I admit it. And you accepted further bribes to pressure the family to scatter the ashes immediately to destroy the evidence, the prosecutor pressed. He dropped his head. Yes, I had a moment of weakness. I was greedy for the money. I listened, shuddering. Sometimes, human greed is far more terrifying than a loaded gun. My dad sat up straight, his voice ringing clear across the room. I expect the justice system to prosecute the right people for the exact crimes they committed. I do not want leniency just because I was the victim, and I certainly do not want leniency just because they used to be my family. I looked at my dad, and tears suddenly spilled from my eyes. This was my father, a man who lived strictly, lived decently, and even after being pushed to the brink of death, never lost his dignity or his moral compass. Carter suddenly shot out of his chair, his voice thick with desperation. Dad, please give me a chance. I was wrong. I know I don't have the right to look you in the eye, but please, ask them to reduce my mother's sentence. I turned to look at him. There was absolutely no love left in my eyes, only a bone-deep, exhausted sadness. Carter, when they locked me in that warehouse and were preparing to execute me, did you think about asking for a reduced sentence for me? Carter was struck completely dumb. He slowly sat back down, burying his face in his hands. The prosecutor took his final notes and concluded the session. This case will now move to trial for the following charges: attempted murder in the first degree, aggravated kidnapping, grand larceny, corporate fraud, and conspiracy to conceal a felony. That sentence rang out like a death knell, confirming the total annihilation of the evil faction. My dad stood up and turned to me. Lauren, the law will handle everything from here. You don't need to worry anymore. I held his hand tightly. Dad, I just want you to be safe. From now on, you and I are just going to live in peace. He smiled warmly. Yes, we made it through the hurricane, my girl. As we walked out of the interrogation room, I looked back one last time. Carter had his face buried in his hands. Evelyn was weeping hysterically, and Reverend Thomas sat completely catatonic, like a man who had lost his soul. It was the price they had to pay. Outside, the sun was finally breaking through the clouds. The light flooded the hallway, feeling as if it was illuminating a brand new path for my life. An old, dark chapter was closing, and a bright new life was waiting for me ahead. The trial for my father's attempted murder moved swiftly. Just over a month later, the federal court handed down the verdicts. Richard Vance received the maximum sentence as the mastermind. Reverend Thomas pleaded guilty to wire fraud, forgery, and accessory after the fact. Evelyn and Carter were sentenced to decades in federal prison as co-conspirators in attempted murder and aggravated kidnapping. Hearing the judge read the verdicts, I didn't feel joy, and I didn't gloat. I only felt like the massive boulder crushing my chest had finally been lifted. There are traumas that can never fully heal, but at the very least, justice stood on the side of the innocent. My dad sat next to me during the sentencing, his face completely serene. When we walked out of the courthouse, he took my hand, his grip as warm as it was when I was a little girl. "Lauren, I don't hold any resentment anymore. I suffered a massive fall, but having you by my side is enough for me." I rested my head on his shoulder, my heart feeling lighter than it ever had. A profoundly dark chapter of my life had officially closed, and I was standing on the threshold of an entirely different future. In the days that followed, Sterling Enterprises stabilized. My dad stepped down from the CEO position, handing daily operations over to the board of directors, and retained only an advisory role. He transferred his controlling shares to me, giving me full voting power. But he made one thing very clear: you don't have to run the company if you don't want to. I just want you to be happy, find your peace, and build a life entirely on your own terms. I agreed, because after everything I had survived, I learned that no matter how cruelly the world treats you, as long as you keep your heart clean, continue to show compassion, and learn to truly love yourself, absolutely no one can extinguish your light. One beautiful evening, I cooked the first family dinner for my dad since the nightmare ended. The kitchen smelled wonderful braised salmon, a light vegetable soup, and fresh greens picked from the garden. My dad ate slowly, occasionally looking up at me and smiling. My daughter wasn't loved as a daughter-in-law, but as my daughter. I will love you enough to make up for all of it. I laughed out loud, even though tears were streaming down my face. Not tears of sadness, but tears of immense gratitude. That night, I stood on the patio, looking up at the starry sky, reflecting on everything that had happened. A deeply abusive marriage, a brutal war against evil people, and a harrowing journey to find myself again. And now, I was finally standing exactly where I was always meant to be. A woman who knows her worth. A woman who knows her boundaries. A woman who knows exactly what she deserves. Tomorrow, I will start fresh. Maybe I'll open a small boutique design firm, or go back to school to study something I always loved but was too afraid to pursue. I don't need a grand, extravagant life. I just need a life that is truly peaceful. Out in the distance, the wind rustled through the oak trees, sounding like a quiet blessing from the universe. I closed my eyes and whispered a promise I don't know to whom, perhaps just to myself. "Lauren, from today onward, you are going to live an incredibly happy life. A dark chapter has closed, and a brand new one has just begun." If you found this story compelling and meaningful, please leave a like to support the narrator. If you have any thoughts or advice, please leave a comment down below. I deeply appreciate every single one of you. Thank you for listening to the very end of this story. I wish you all abundant health and peace in your lives. Goodbye.